The Byte Show is listener supported at thebyteshow.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Angel and Hughes, and this is The Byte Show. And we are very fortunate to have Petyer Levenda with us. He's a researcher and an author, and I want to bring everybody's attention to Sinister Forces, a grimoire of American political witchcraft. It is a trilogy, and it is absolutely excellent. The research that Petyer put into those books, it's amazing. And I really highly recommend that everybody get the trilogy, Sinister Forces. And you can obtain them at sinisterforces.info and, of course, Amazon and all the other usual places. But tonight, we are going to delve into The Angel and the Sorcerer, a remarkable story of the occult origins of Mormonism and the rise of Mormons in American politics. Petyer, this book is fantastic.
Well, that's high praise coming from you, Georgianne, because you probably know more about Mormonism than I do, and more than most people.
Yeah, unfortunately. Tell us how this crazy religion got started.
Well, I mean, that's one of the most famous, one of the most fascinating, I should say, stories of American history in general, I think, and especially of religious history or religious studies, we might say. Mormonism began with, of course, the prophet himself, Joseph Smith Jr., who, at the age of about 17, was in the woods of upstate New York, performing ritual magic. This is something that, Mormons don't really start off by telling you.
Yeah.
When you first talk to Mormons, this is not quite, what you expect. So here we are in upstate New York. The Smith family had originally come from Vermont. They were not really doing very well in Vermont. There was all sorts of economic problems that they had. I mean, basically, their economic situation was quite similar to the economic situation we have today. And there was really no way to earn money other than by working the land. And the land was not being kind to the Smiths. They were not able to make a lot of money doing that. So Joseph Smith Jr., their fifth child, in order of birth, Joseph Smith Jr. Decided that he was going to try his hand at divining for treasure. In other words, trying to find buried treasure that had been buried by the pirates. There was this long story that many famous pirates had come ashore, had gone deep into the woods in New England and New York and other parts along up and down the East Coast and buried treasure. And then killed the people who had buried it. I mean, killed them there, at the site of the buried treasure, so that the only person who would know where the treasure was buried was the pirate himself.
Yeah.
So there was this idea that you could find this buried treasure sometimes by using divining rods, which are still in use today. These are usually a forked stick or sometimes two pieces of metal, and you walk along the ground, and when the forked stick starts to bend towards the earth, or when the two pieces of metal cross in front of you, that's an indication that you're standing over some buried treasure of some kind, some money. If you're looking for money, it could be for water, if you're divining for water. But it's a kind of psychic technology, let's say, that was very popular, very common in 17th and 18th century America, and it still is common today. I've seen diviners when I was a child. I spent about a year or two in New Hampshire growing up, and there were diviners that worked there. We had a terrible drought during the year from 1963 to 64 in New Hampshire, in southern New Hampshire, and diviners were out in force looking for sources of water underneath the earth to dig wells.
The Nabateans in the Bible were also diviners.
Right, that's correct. So this is an ancient
Yes.
an ancient technology. So the Joseph Smith family started out doing that, looking for buried treasure that way. Buried treasure or maybe gold ore or silver ore, underneath the earth, something like that, trying to find a source of income because they were desperate. They had really no other sources of income. There's a story that if you work hard, and you're diligent about it, you'll be okay. That's not always the case, as we all know.
Yeah.
You can work very hard and be poor. And the Smiths worked hard and they were poor. So Joseph Smith Jr. took it upon himself to see if he could solve the situation. And his sources of inspiration were books on magic. Now, I'm not making any of this stuff up.
I know you're not.
To understand this. This sounds a little outlandish for the founder of a religion, especially the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well,
this is like,
Peter, it's very much the same with Scientology.
Well, it is. I make that point in The Angel and the Sorcerer. The Scientologists and the Mormons started with exactly the same magical texts.
Yes.
They started with the books that were attributed to Agrippa, and that which were printed later in Francis Barrett's The Magus, a very, very popular book when it came out in the beginning of the 19th century, around 1801, I think it was when it was first published in England. And these books were available in the United States at that time. There were a lot of occultists operating out of the United States in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. The governor of the state of Connecticut was an alchemist. Winthrop had a large library of over 250 books on the occult, on ceremonial magic, on alchemy, on all sorts of spiritual subjects of that nature, the kind of arcane subject matter like Rosicrucianism and that sort of thing. The president of Yale University, Harvard University, everybody was involved in some form of occult research. They even taught astrology for a long time at the Harvard Medical School.
Yes.
So these were things that were part of an educated person's background. And so it kind of filtered down to the bookstores and the bookshops, the libraries that were around where Joseph Smith was growing up, in those very towns in upstate New York where he was growing up, which was undergoing a tremendous religious revival at the time. The Second Great Awakening, it was called. And you had a lot of revivalist stuff going on. You had a lot of religious sects coming up out of nowhere. Denominations were springing up all over the place. New prophets were coming out. And here was Joseph Smith, a young boy, around 12 years old is when he began to do this divining. And by the time he was 17, he was talking to the angel Moroni. He had gone to the woods on the autumnal equinox, September 22nd, and for the next number of years, he kept going back year after year after year until he was finally allowed by the angel, according to his story, to take the golden plates that were buried under the earth and transcribe them and actually create the Book of Mormon. This is the story that has been told. The Mormons change some of the details.
Yes.
According to them, Joseph Smith was just this pious kid who was out in the woods praying. And an angel appeared to him and gave him the golden plates. But in actuality, he was performing works of ceremonial magic. The first reports of what he was doing that were first published show undeniably that he was working rituals of ceremonial magic. These are the same rituals that L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons would later use in the late 1940s and which eventually led to the creation of Scientology.
And JPL.
Well, yeah, and the Jet Propulsion Lab, too.
Yeah.
This is the same thing. I mean, these two American religions, I'm kind of hesitant to call Scientology a religion, but they like to call themselves a religion, so I'll give them the benefit of a doubt. But these two churches, let's say, the Church of Scientology and the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, had their origins in pretty much the same ritual magic. The same idea of casting a circle, burning incense, reciting incantations in the middle of the night on a certain sacred days of the calendar in order to contact spiritual forces. And this is what Joseph Smith was doing repeatedly for a number of years, for 4 years, until he finally got a hold of these famous golden plates. Now, of course, whoever saw the golden plates? I mean, Joseph Smith claimed there were golden plates. In the beginning of the Book of Mormon, you'll find testimony by witnesses who claimed that they too saw the golden plates. Several of these witnesses later recanted their story, but that's another topic. But there were plates on which were inscribed this entire history of America before the arrival of Columbus, before its discovery by European settlers, by European pioneers and settlers. So this is a long story, and it's the history of the Jewish people, by the way. So this is the history of Jewish people who fled at the time of the destruction of the first temple, of Solomon's temple. So we're talking about, 700 years before the Common Era. They came somehow in boats across the ocean to what is now America. And this Jewish tribe set up shop here. And then what we read about in the Book of Mormon is a history of how the tribe split into two factions, fought each other. One side won, the other side lost. And as the so-called good side was losing, they decided to write their history before it was lost forever onto these golden plates, bury them in the earth, and this is where Joseph Smith found them. The plates were written, according to Joseph Smith, in a dialect called Reformed Egyptian. This language does not exist. It's never been seen to exist anywhere. And Egyptian had not yet been completely deciphered at the time that Joseph Smith was claiming he could read Reformed Egyptian. The Rosetta Stone had just been discovered. The work of translating and finding out what all the letters and the hieroglyphics meant was still in process. So people could say anything about hieroglyphics. I mean, Count Cagliostro, for instance, claimed that he understood what the hieroglyphics meant, that they were a mystical kind of language back in the 18th century before Joseph Smith. Cagliostro founded an entire form of Freemasonry called Egyptian Masonry that was based on this idea that the hieroglyphics are a mystical language. Joseph Smith picked up on that idea and claimed he could read these hieroglyphics and therefore was able to transcribe the Book of Mormon. The technique is fascinating because it comes straight out of the Middle Ages. Joseph Smith would put what he called a show stone, like a crystal ball. Today we would call it a crystal ball. In those days it could just be a rock. Maybe it was quartz. Maybe it was crystal. Maybe it was just a regular rock. Into a hat, into like a large hat, like a stovepipe hat. He would stare into the darkness at the stone. He would see visions. And in this particular instance, he would see the language being translated from the golden plates, and he would dictate what he saw to a scribe. There would be someone there taking his dictation as he talked.
It was also called a peepstone.
A peepstone, right.
Yeah.
Peepstone, showstone. The technique was called scrying in some cases. We would call it today crystal gazing. Yeah. And it's very similar to a system that was used in the early 1600s by John Dee and Edward Kelly in Prague at the time when they were contacting angelic forces. It was a magical system that's been called today Enochian, or the angelic language. And again, we have a strange alphabet, a very strange language, and we have somebody doing the scrying, somebody doing the peeping, or divining, and another person writing down what was being dictated. It's almost exactly what was taking place in the early 17th century in Prague by Dee and Kelly, two English magicians. And Dee was the court astrologer for Queen Elizabeth I.
Yes.
Very famous man.
Yes.
A translator of some of the greatest Greek texts also on mathematics and physics. So we have a very intelligent guy then getting involved in magic and doing all this transcription. And then 200 years later, we have Joseph Smith doing virtually the same thing with a scribe of his own, dictating the Book of Mormon. And what we have today is this book, which claims to be the history of America up until, the time of Jesus. According to the Book of Mormon, Jesus himself visited America, was there after the crucifixion and talked to the people living in America at the time, the remnants of the Jewish tribes. So we still have, this continuity from the first temple, from the destruction of the first temple to Jesus' appearance, all of it taking place in the Middle East, and yet we have here a parallel situation, a parallel history in America. This was very important for Joseph Smith's agenda, because his agenda was to prove that America was the promised land, that the New Jerusalem would be built not in Jerusalem, in Palestine, but in somewhere in America, and that the Jews who had fled had wound up not in other countries, but again in America, that this was their promised land. And Smith wanted to see the Jews, the different tribes, come together in America. And this was a common dream, not just of Joseph Smith, but of other people who were trying to promote this idea as well. And this is necessary to understand. It's necessary to understand this, to understand, what the implications might be for a Mormon presidency or a Mormon administration, because there's a definite political agenda. I mean, Joseph Smith ran for president, something that a lot of people don't know or don't remember. But the first Mormon to run for president was Joseph Smith himself. The year that he was assassinated, he was running for president. He, at that time, was the head of the largest standing army in the United States, second only to the United States Army itself in size, and the largest Masonic organization in the state of Illinois. So here was a person who was organizing at a tremendous level and who had designs on becoming the president of the United States, and actually thought he was going to win, and had already begun sending ambassadors around to foreign countries. So the political agenda and the religious agenda for Joseph Smith were the same, kind of against the idea of separation of church and state. Smith's ideas became more and more bizarre by contemporary standards. The presence of three different gods at creation, plural marriage. We know all the stories about the magic underwear and polygamy and all of that. But these are all genuine principles, religious principles, that Joseph Smith had created, that Brigham Young had tried to put into effect in a much grander way when they finally made it to Utah. And all of this was going to be the way, the belief system of the Mormons. They gave up some of this in order to belong to America as one of the American states when Utah attained statehood. But it was an accommodation. It was called the Great Accommodation. They accommodated American law and then repudiated their practice of polygamy, among other things.
Well, I want to interject something
yes,
here, Peter. They still practice what's called marriage behind the veil, and that's a very, very secret type of marriage, and it involves plural marriages.
Well, that's right. In fact, I talk about the famous case of the Salamander letter, and Hoffman, the forger, who had started forging all documents in order to sort of extort money from the LDS Church. And his grandparents married that way. His grandparents married in a plural behind the veil, behind the curtain in the temple. So this is a lot of, Romney's grandparents. Mitt Romney's grandparents were also plural, involved in polygamy. That's why they moved to Mexico.
Yes.
So this is very recent. This is in the memories of many living Mormons. Remember plural marriage back, at the turn of the century. And as you stated, it still goes on today.
Yes.
So although they have officially said we're not going to be involved in this, and they've made some official statements, they've never taken back the belief. They've never repudiated their beliefs, only their actions. I don't want to keep bringing up Romney, but a lot of people probably associate now Romney and Mormonism. So I want to point out one particular aspect. When Romney was asked about Mormonism, his response is, I will only discuss my actions, not my beliefs.
Yeah.
And this goes back to the law that was passed by the Supreme Court in the case of Mormon polygamy. The Supreme Court upheld the separation of church and state, but, this is an important but, they said that we cannot legislate beliefs, but we can legislate actions. And they said you can believe in polygamy all you want, you just can't do it.
Yeah.
And, I'm kind of with the Mormons on this one in saying that, okay, there is a problem here, you know. At what point do we draw the line between religious actions and religious beliefs? I thought we're not supposed to make any laws regarding an establishment of religion. And so, of course, that's one of those First Amendment things that's open to interpretation. Because at what point do you say, okay, the government can't, you know, make a law about this? What if they pass a law against going to communion in a Catholic church because it's unsanitary?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Or especially the Orthodox Church. I mean, as someone who's been to a lot of Russian and Greek Orthodox services in my time, I can attest that we have a big golden cup, and there's a golden spoon that goes into the cup, and, you know, each communicant is, you know, fed the bread and wine from the same spoon.
Yeah.
So you could make a case. The Department of Health could step in and say, okay, you can believe in all this all you want to, but you can't do it anymore, you know. So, you know, I kind of sympathize with the Mormons in their predicament, but at the same time, they really did give in quite easily on this issue, a little too quickly, if you ask me.
Yeah.
So it means that they were up to something. I mean, from my point of view, if I'm a true believer, and I really believe in Joseph Smith, and I believe in all the stuff he came out with, you know, proxy baptism, you know, baptizing the dead, plural marriage, the magic underwear, all the rest of it, then I'm not going to just give it up because the U.S. government tells me I can't do it. You know,
Yeah.
I'm going to say I gave it up maybe, but I'm going to continue on privately. I'm going to make my actions and my beliefs run in harmony. You know, so I don't know. You know, but these are things that have been going on. I listened to the debate, the vice presidential debate, and I heard Paul Ryan say that his religion informs all of his actions as a person and as a political person, that you can't separate the religion from the person. And I thought to myself, aha,
Yeah.
gotcha. I mean, Ryan's a Catholic, but
Yeah.
his running mate, Mitt Romney's a Mormon. Are we to say that he can't separate his religion from his political life? If it's the same for Romney, then there are implications for a Mormon presidency. This is what, to me, is a fascinating subject to think about.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in Mormon history, there have been several massacres that were carried out by Mormons. Can you tell us about that?
Well, you have to know about the context. Mormonism, Joseph Smith himself was a very polarizing kind of figure. You were sort of passionately in favor or passionately against him.
Yeah.
He was a self-proclaimed prophet, and at one point he was claiming divinity. He had, of course, plural wives, which was a major bone of contention with the rest of the country in so many ways. He also created his own bank. He created his own currency. He was using fraudulent means, let's face it, fraudulent means to get investors to invest in his bank. He would fill a chest full of rocks, cover it with a thin veneer of silver coins, and try to prove to people he had enormous chests full of silver, which of course he did not have. And that's what he did to gain, you know, investors in his banks, which then went belly up in the 19th century version of what we're going through today. So all of this was going on. People were getting passionately involved in the question of Mormonism. They realized that he was not Christian in any mainstream sense of the word. Although Jesus Christ was important in the whole story, he was about as important in Mormonism at the time as Jesus is to Islam today.
Yeah.
Both religions regard Jesus Christ quite highly, but to Islam, Jesus was merely a prophet, not the Son of God, and Muhammad was the prophet who basically was the seal of the prophets, the last prophet. Joseph Smith kind of saw his role the same way. He was extending, or he was perfecting the system that Jesus had started. So you have a lot of violent tendencies starting to brew against the Mormons. They were kind of kicked out of Ohio. They went through Indiana into Illinois. They were getting too powerful in Illinois. Joseph Smith was getting very autocratic. He was running for president. He was making a lot of people very nervous. Like I say, he had the largest standing militia in the country, second only to the U.S. Army. This guy was a military and political threat as well as a religious threat. He was arrested for treason regarding actions he had undertaken in Missouri with the groups there, with his Mormon organization there. People have been killed in Missouri. There have been violent acts between Mormons and non-Mormons there. People have been assassinated. People have been murdered. Joseph Smith was finally arrested for this, and while he was in jail, the jail was attacked, was raided by anti-Mormons. A gunfight ensued, and Joseph Smith was murdered. He was assassinated the same year that he was running for president. So this then sent a shockwave through the Mormon community. There was danger of a Mormon uprising against the U.S. government. The governor of Illinois was really nervous about this and was making sure, trying to do as much as he could to calm that down, but at the same time he had to make sure his militia was ready to fight. The tension was very tight, and orders had gone out to arrest many of the other Mormon leaders. So Brigham Young, who at that point was sort of the number 2 man, the golden boy, replacing a series of golden boys in Mormon history up to that point, Brigham Young, a great organizer, decided what he was going to do was he was going to beat the federal marshals and escape before they had a chance to arrest them and possibly close them down forever. So he took his people in February, in the dead of winter, and fled from Illinois across the Mississippi River and started heading into Missouri and then to points west. This was a horrific expedition because everyone was freezing. They had very little in the way of victuals and stuff to keep them together along the way. They had to stop several times along the way. People died of exposure. They died of starvation. Finally, they make it to Utah, where they set up camp, as we all know, in Salt Lake City, and that was going to become their new headquarters. Well, Salt Lake City in those days was not part of the United States. When Brigham Young actually went there, it was part of Mexico. Now, this sounds like an outrageous thing for people to believe, but Mexican territory went up and included Utah. It included, of course, Arizona, New Mexico, large parts of California, Texas, all the way up into Utah. So Brigham Young thought he was safe there. The Mexicans weren't really sending up any troops that far. They just claimed the territory. The United States hadn't sent any troops there because they didn't have that territory. And the Mexican-American War hadn't begun yet, so Brigham Young thinks he's pretty safe there. So pioneers now are passing through Utah in covered wagons, the famous Conestoga wagons, going to California. They're on their way west. So it's go west, young man, go west. And so we have a lot of wagon trains passing through Utah, sometimes sending up wagons for supplies. They will buy supplies, food and water and things in the Salt Lake City and then move on. Well, at one point, at a place called Mountain Meadows, one whole wagon train passed through the area, and there were rumors that the people who had killed Joseph Smith, who had assassinated him at the jail in Carthage, Illinois, were in that wagon train. And that was all the excuse anyone needed. The Mormons were already a little irritated at the non-Mormons passing through using their territory. Although they were fine, as far as selling them stuff was concerned, they realized that they were considered sort of alien creatures by the rest of the American people. And there was just a lot of tension between them and between the others. And this just erupted. Brigham Young was still alive. He was still running the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The details are a little murky, but what we do know for sure is that a contingent of Mormon raiders, like a militia group, accompanied by certain members of the Native American population, then went and attacked the wagon train. As is usual, the trains went into a circle, like we see in the movies. They tried to defend themselves, and it was working for a while. There was a kind of a standoff, and success was not happening. So what was important was the Mormons then tried to pretend that they were coming to the rescue of the wagon train. So the militia came in, like the cavalry in the movies. They show up at the wagon train saying, "Listen, we're surrounded by Indian territory. It's very dangerous. We're gonna save you. We're gonna rescue you and bring you back to Salt Lake City. Don't worry about it." What happened was they separated the men from the women and children. They took the men a little way away from the wagon train and massacred them, killed them, every single one.
Yeah.
Then the women and children were taken out. And with the exception of the very, very young, who would not be good witnesses, the other women and all the women and the older children were also massacred, were also killed, and their bodies left there. I mean, the bodies were left there for years. They were eventually found later and buried by a commission that was investigating the crimes.
Was that called the Meadow Mountain Massacre?
Mountain Meadows Massacre, yes.
Yeah, oh boy. Oh.
We know now that Brigham Young was aware of this before it happened. He did not say, go out and kill all those people. He basically did a sort of Mafia Don thing, will no one remove this thorn from my soul, this sort of Nixon-esque, boy, I wish somebody would do something about those guys, that kind of thing. Basically giving the word to go and do something without actually saying it. A lot of the so-called Indians who showed up for the initial attack were not Native Americans at all. They were Mormons dressed as Indians to make it seem like it was an Indian attack. Because even the Native Americans at one point said, we didn't sign on for this. You said we could plunder and rob the wagon train. You didn't say anything about killing people. So the Native Americans themselves gave up and said, no, we're going home. So it left it up to the Mormons themselves to finish the job, and that's why they showed up as rescuers and instead slaughtered them. This was a major blight on the history of Mormonism, but it goes to show the degree of tension that existed between the United States and the Mormons, who consider themselves no longer in the United States. Brigham Young wrote a letter to the President of the United States saying, we love the United States, we appreciate it, we think the Constitution is great and all of that, but we got to get out because, it's just not home for us. We can't exist in this country. And that's why they went to Utah. And then eventually, they were surrounded. The Mexican-American War had taken place. The Mexicans lost a great deal of territory. They lost what we now know as Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, and all the way up to Utah. They lost all of that territory. The U.S. took it. So now the Mormons were in a bind. They either had to keep going, but there was nowhere to go because California was now part of U.S. territory. All those lands to the west were. The Mormons were basically landlocked. There was really no promised land for them to go. So they made what is known as the Great Accommodation, and they gave up polygamy. At least they said they did, in order to become part of the United States and become Americans. And they went through this major sea change around the beginning of the 20th century in which they tried to portray themselves as more mainstream Christian than they really are. And if you really look at their teachings and you look at their own texts, not just the Book of Mormon, but the other Mormon texts and the Mormon instructional materials, the theological texts, and all the rest of it, and Joseph Smith's own writings and his own pronouncements, and Brigham Young's pronouncements as well, you're going to see this is not any kind of Christianity that anybody would be familiar with. And I'm not saying this to condemn Mormonism or to attack it. I'm just stating the facts as they are. You cannot accept the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints as a mainstream Christian denomination, no matter how much they insist that they are. It just is not true. According to Mormonism, there were three gods present at creation. According to Mormonism, the true Mormon will become divine, will reach godhood, will have his own planet.
And that's contingent upon how many wives and children that he has.
Yes. So you can't just get up there with one wife and one child. That's, no child left behind.
Yeah.
You've got to get as many as possible. And, you can see right now, the people in China would not make good Mormons, with the one-child policy. They're kind of screwed. So you have this. I mean, you can tell by the Mormons that we know now, are quite famous. The Mormons that we see on television and the Mormons that we learn about, they are densely populated. I mean, they have a lot of children. This is part of what they're supposed to be doing. And, as it comes out, once in a while we realize there are plural marriages and all the rest of it. And the Mormon underwear hasn't gone away and the proxy baptisms haven't gone away. All the rest of their what we would call, in anthropology, they're antinomian practices. They're non-traditional or they're non-orthodox practices are still there. They're still very much part of the religion. And the temple endowment ceremony is very much a part of the religion. It's an important, integral part of the religion.
Explain the endowment ceremony.
Well, this is, we've talked in our discussions before a bit about Freemasonry. Joseph Smith was enthralled by Freemasonry at a time when Masonry was kind of out of fashion in the United States because of the William Morgan affair. William Morgan was a Freemason in upstate New York in the same area Joseph Smith was living at the time, so he was intimate with the details of this. William Morgan was a Freemason who was threatening to publish the initiation rituals, and the Freemasons objected to this quite strenuously. He was kidnapped, and he was never heard from or seen again.
That's Morgan.
That's William Morgan.
Yeah.
William Morgan's wife then became one of Joseph Smith's plural wives.
Yeah.
Imagine that, right? Joseph Smith aligning himself, and by extension, Mormonism, with William Morgan, with Freemasonry, with all of this. He becomes initiated into Freemasonry. He takes the 3 degrees, and then basically forces all the other male members of his church, by this time numbering in the hundreds and close to the thousands, to become Freemasons as well as Mormons. So Freemasonry then becomes part of the ritual environment, part of the ritual structure of Mormonism at this point. In order to become a real, true Mormon, you had to be a Freemason in Joseph Smith's time. So his church was called the Temple, as it is still today in, of course, Salt Lake City and all the temples around the world. They are temples. They're not churches. They're called temples or tabernacles. And these are references to Masonic ritual. Now, the temple endowment ceremony is a special ceremony that takes place in the temple, and it's kind of a Masonic initiation ceremony. You are anointed. You are bathed and anointed and cleansed. You put on clean garments, the so-called Mormon underwear, the famous magical underwear, as they call it sometimes derogatorily. And on this underwear, you have 2 symbols. You have the compass and the squares of Mormonism, of Masonry, excuse me. So you have the Masonic symbols embroidered onto the underwear. And you're supposed to put this on and never take it off. I mean, for the rest of your life. And
not even to wash it.
Not even to wash it, yeah. So you're supposed to wear this forever. And at the same time, you have another obligation. One of these other obligations is you have to baptize the dead. And you have to baptize your ancestors. You have to go back to all your ancestors who had never had the opportunity to become Mormons because Mormonism started after they had died, maybe, or they had never heard of Mormonism or whatever the reason was. You have to baptize first your ancestors. You do all the genealogical research, and you baptize them. You are a proxy. You take the vows for them. That's why it's called proxy baptism. You're the proxy. You're standing in for this dead person. And whether they like it or not, they're going to be made a Mormon. And you're expected to do this in order to become a true Mormon, a full-fledged Mormon, shall we say. You're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do it all the time, not just once, but you're supposed to go back and do this regularly on a regular basis to keep your status alive as a Mormon. When you run out of ancestors, well, you look for other people's ancestors. It became a scandal last year when it was found out that proxy baptism was including Jews who died in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
And in fact, it even included Eli Wiesel, who's still alive. And it was a shock to him to realize he'd been baptized a Mormon. The Mormons thought he was dead, but of course he was still alive. A famous Jewish writer on the Holocaust. So, I mean, the kind of arrogance, that the church takes upon itself to baptize posthumously all of these people who had nothing to do with Mormonism, nothing to do even with Christianity in the case of Jews who died in the Holocaust, and who knows what else, or who knows who else. I mean, the world is their oyster. They've got billions of people to baptize, from that point of view. So this is what's happening. Plus, of course, they're baptizing Native Americans who had passed, who had died. They're bringing them into the fold because as far as Mormons are concerned, Native Americans are not really, people of Asiatic descent. Native Americans are Jews. They're the lost tribe, one of the lost tribes, and they have to be brought back into the fold. So they view Native Americans, the people we used to call American Indians, they view them as Jews, which was a very common misconception in the 19th century, the mid-19th century. A lot of books were written trying to prove that the Native Americans were the lost tribes. So this was not unique to Joseph Smith, but he literally made a religion out of it. And have been baptizing them as well. So I'm not talking about living Native Americans. I'm talking about dead Native Americans. So I imagine Geronimo has been baptized and made into, a Mormon posthumously, and on and on and on. So this is what happens. This is part of the temple endowment ceremony, is giving you this opportunity. Number one, you view a reenactment of creation, which has very little to do with the book of Genesis. And then you view a lot of other ritual scenes that you're supposed to memorize. There are passwords that you're given, and there are handshakes, as in Freemasonry, both the passwords and the handshakes. You're given a new garment, as in Freemasonry, like the apron. And then basically it's a Masonic ceremony.
They even have, in one of the ceremonies, the man will sit there and someone will come and wash his feet.
Yep. Right. Yep, you are cleansed.
Yeah.
You have to go through the solution ceremony. So you're cleansed this way. All of this takes place. I mean, it has elements of both Freemasonry in it, as well as other things. I talk about in The Angel and The Sorcerer the alchemical influences on Joseph Smith, because alchemy was a big subject as well as ritual magic when Joseph Smith was growing up in upstate New York. And alchemists were believed to be able to change base materials into gold. They were believed they could change lead into gold. But alchemists were also accused of something else. They were accused of counterfeiting, of making fake gold coins and fake silver coins. So alchemy was actually against the law in some counties, because most people figured alchemists were nothing but forgers and counterfeiters. So alchemist was kind of synonymous with that. So there's a lot of alchemical influence in Joseph Smith's writings, and particularly in the practices of sacred marriage that he instituted later on. He had the first anointing and the second anointing, and he had, various orders of priesthood, again based on Masonic and, in a sense, Kabbalistic ideas, but also in alchemical ideas. He believed in a kind of mystical marriage, which is why polygamy was okay. He believed it was, a marriage of souls and a marriage of essences. And this is very close to a lot of Rosicrucian and alchemical writing that was current at the time when he was alive and when he was writing and when he was pronouncing these various doctrines. So there's a lot of alchemy in Mormonism and a lot of Kabbalah and a lot of Freemasonry, a lot of ritual magic. It's really hard if you start separating all of these things out from Mormonism. You're not left with very much left. I mean, there isn't much after that. Take away the Native Americans as, the lost tribes of Israel. Take away the ritual magic in the forest in which he meets the angel and uncovers the golden plates. Take away the transcription of the plates while he's staring into basically a crystal ball and reciting what he's found. Take away all of that. You don't have much left. You don't have doctrinaire Christianity or Judaism. What you have is occultism. You have an occult society. And it's probably one of the most successful occult organizations in history, really, in modern times, anyway.
Peter?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And they have what they call home teachers. If your husband is a faithful tithing member, and say you and your husband are not getting on well, they will assign him to home teach a single woman. And the whole idea
Yeah.
is get rid of the current wife and get with this one because she's a good Mormon. There's a lot of dirty business that goes on.
Well, and you know this yourself, and you know this from personal experience. I mean,
Yes.
which I credit that much more than my own research. Of course, I've talked to Mormons, of course, over many years.
Yeah.
In different parts of the world too, and I've talked to the missionaries, who of course are very, bright-eyed and, young and, rosy-cheeked and really true believers in what they're doing. And you can't hold that against youth. You can't hold that against, the idea that the need to believe in something. These are not evil people when they start out. They're young, they're impressionable, their families are Mormon. This is what they know. This is all they know. It's like growing up Roman Catholic or growing up Jewish or Muslim.
Yeah.
This is what you think is good and right. So you can't attack them on that basis. But as they get older and as they're exposed to all of this, there's a decision they have to make. They have to realize at a certain point that the beliefs they're hearing about, the home teaching as an example,
Yeah.
or the proxy baptisms and all the rest of it, they realize that this is not what the rest of the world thinks about Mormonism. This is not what the rest of the world knows about religion in general or about Christianity. Let's put it this way. Let's talk about Christianity alone. They have to make a decision at some point in their lives, and the decision is, okay, I'm going to stick with this even though I know it's not really mainstream. Some of the ideas will be considered really bizarre by my friends who are not Mormons, and a sort of split personality thing starts to take place. You start to hide these beliefs. I mean, you're expected to hide a lot of it once you've gone through the temple endowment ceremony. The handshakes and the passwords and all of this stuff is secret.
And you cannot go to the temple unless you are tithing, and it's 10% of your increase in income. And you have to do it, or you cannot go to the temple.
Well, they won't give you the temple recommend, which
Right.
is the most important paper to a Mormon. It means you can go to the temple, and the recommend comes from the bishop in your area, right, and the religious group that controls your stake. So all of this has to be done appropriately. They have to vouch for you, vouch that you're a good Mormon, that you've paid up your dues, and then you can go and perform all of these other, and of course the missionary activity and all the rest is important. So, yeah, I mean, and we get to the tithing part. You can't talk about Mormons and not talk about money.
Yeah.
There's just no way out. Back in the day, back in the 1980s, when Salt Lake City was considered the Ponzi scheme capital of America, one guy who remained nameless, but he was giving an interview to the newspaper, said if Joseph Smith was alive today, he'd be the leveraged buyout king of Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Joseph Smith was big into money. His focus was money. How did he start his religion? By looking for money. And it was by looking for other people's money. It was looking for buried treasure, stuff that had been stolen from somebody else. That's what Joseph Smith wanted to find. He wanted to find other people's money. He wanted to dig in the ground and find buried treasure and make off with it, steal it from the spirits who were guarding the treasure, So this is what Smith wanted to do since he was 17 years old and younger. He wanted to find this money and walk away with it. And then later he starts his own banks. He starts his own funds. He starts his own investment schemes. He invests in real estate and loses a fortune. This was the beginning, of paying capital. I mean, this was the beginning of what would become a Mormon fascination with making money and a real fixation on making money. And this is a kind of a manifestation of the alchemical ideas that were current at the time. Smith grew up at a time of tremendous economic upheaval in the United States. It was a time of a depression in the country. And there were very little ways to make money honestly and legitimately. So what was going on was Smith was begging, borrowing, and stealing money from people his entire life. He was just always on the outs financially. So Brigham Young took what Smith had created after Smith had died, had been assassinated. Brigham Young then goes to Salt Lake City and does a much better job organizing the finances. In fact, it was Mormons who were present at the famous gold strike in California at Sutter's Mill when the gold rush started in the 19th century, the famous gold rush where everybody went out to find gold. It was Mormons on the scene.
Why am I not surprised?
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Mormons were there, panning for gold. They found gold. They brought the gold back to Salt Lake City, and suddenly Salt Lake City was becoming a financial empire. This is Brigham Young, still alive, and he's still doing it. He's getting it done. You know, he was running the Mormon church longer than Joseph Smith had even been alive. So Brigham Young was able to bring all of these disparate elements together and create this structure of Freemasonry, of occultism, of alchemy, and all of the beliefs that Smith had about divinization of the human being, of the apotheosis of each individual human being, if they were good Mormons, of sacred marriage, of plural marriage, of proxy baptism, of the blood atonement as well. Okay, let's not forget the blood atonement, also part of Mormon religion. And the blood atonement is what made the Mountain Meadows massacre legal in Mormon eyes, because the blood atonement was an oath you took at the temple endowment ceremony. Now, at that ceremony, you take the oaths that are Masonic oaths. You will not reveal the secrets, or your tongue will be cut out, your throat will be slit, all of these things that you promise, the oath that you take when you become a Freemason. You took also to become a Mormon in the temple endowment ceremony, but there was an extra added thing on that, and that was that if you find Joseph Smith's killers, you must kill them and spill their blood. The spilling of the blood is what is necessary. You can't strangle them. You can't poison them. Their blood must be spilled. And that's why the Mountain Meadows massacre took place the way it did. The blood of these innocent people was spilled. That was part of the blood atonement. So this was part of really the ritual promise that they took in the temple in Salt Lake.
Peter, how did they justify doing that to innocent people?
Well, we call them innocent today. To them, to the Mormons at the time, these were the people, at least some of them, somehow, because that was the rumor, these were the people who had killed Joseph Smith. These were his murderers. I mean, the entire wagon train, as far as they were concerned, was guilty. They had to kill all the men because they didn't know which was which. And, of course, they couldn't leave the women and children around.
Yeah.
Because they'd be witnesses. The women and children were killed, too. You know, this was, collateral damage as far as they were concerned. Some of the children, by the way, were allowed to live, the ones that were considered too young to bear witness. They were brought to Salt Lake City and adopted into Mormon families. Until the U.S. government, after the Civil War, was able to go into Salt Lake City and finish their investigation and finally say, okay, we identified these children as part of that organization, as part of the wagon train. We're taking them out, and we're putting them back with their families or their relatives, wherever they may be. And whatever ones they could identify, they did take out of Salt Lake City. So they did keep the few of the very young, but the others were killed. They found corpses, they found bodies of women with children in their arms. They had just that way and had not been buried. The Mormons did not even bury the bodies. They had to be buried later. There's a monument now at the site, at the Mountain Meadows site. It can be visited today. They've finally done what they could, not the Mormons, by the way, but the state, I believe, has finally done and made a kind of an important monument to those innocent victims. So that was one of several. Other massacres had taken place. There was open warfare, between Mormons and non-Mormons for a while. So there was a lot of this going back and forth. So it did go on. Both sides, in some cases, were guilty of extreme violence towards the other. So, I try to be even-handed in The Angel and the Sorcerer by trying to point out, why people thought the way they did, why they acted the way they did. We can't excuse the massacre of innocents. I don't believe that there's any way to excuse the slaughter of women and children. If you know that's what you're going to have to do because you're killing the men, well, then you don't kill the men. You let it ride.
Right.
You don't just go in and start this thing that you can't get out of and snowball this effect to the point where hundreds of people are being killed. And then blamed on the Indians, right?
Yeah.
Blamed on the very people that you say are the descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, for crying out loud, right? You're blaming your ancestors, basically, for this massacre. I mean, the hypocrisy of it is overwhelming. But anyway, that's what happened, and we can't escape it.
Oh, that's horrific. That is horrific. I think that in the church, writers that write books and that mention the Meadow Mountain Massacre, they couch it as being it was a bunch of Indians that attacked the Mormons, and they had to kill them.
Yeah, that's not true.
I know.
That's definitively documented. I mean, it's not true. There were, some of the men who took part in that massacre, one or two became witnesses for the prosecution. We know what happened. We know the names of the people involved. We know everything. There's no doubt. I mean, those histories, of course, are Mormon histories, and they have to be rewritten because the documents say something else entirely. But the Mormons are not really intimidated by the facts, to put it kindly. I mean, the latest edition that I've seen of the Book of Mormon, in the introduction, still claims that the Native Americans are descendants of the Lost Tribes. Today, even though it's been proven definitively through DNA and other evidence that it's not possible for the Native Americans to have been Jews,
right.
Still the Mormons are still, adhering to that because that's what their doctrine says. This is an example of how religion, becomes an obstacle to the pursuit of truth. Religions have to bend, a little bit with the truth. They've got to come out and say, maybe they can explain it by saying, well, they're spiritual sons of the Lost Tribes or something, but to claim that they are genetically, racially identical to Jews or that there's Jewish blood in the Native Americans. It's impossible.
And that's a good thing. Oh my gosh. Explain the different types of marriage that the Mormons engage in. We know about the plural marriage, but in the temple, the sealed marriage.
Well, that's where it gets very alchemical. That's when it gets into mysticism, of a very deep order, because when you get to that point, you're really in Hermetica. You're really in Esoterica. You're in the realm of what was European occultism in the 17th and 18th centuries. You're talking about what I call the chemical wedding. There was a document that came out in the early 1600s, which was the Fama Fraternitatis, which was a pamphlet that announced the existence of the Rosicrucian Society. And it talks about Christian Rosenkreutz, which is obviously a code name for a pilgrim who went to the East, to the Middle East, and learned some occult secrets, some mystical secrets, brought it back with him to Europe, lived for 120 years, etc. A lot of mysticism, but the idea that there was a secret society in Europe looking out for the welfare of Europe was a very strong and potent story at the time. This was followed by another document on Rosicrucians, and finally by a third document called The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. And this is a very allegorical fable about a pilgrim who on Good Friday is summoned by an angel to go and attend a wedding. And this wedding is a very arcane affair, which involves less of a wedding and more of another massacre. A lot of people are killed in the course of this ceremony, but then they're risen from the dead again. And it's a very fascinating story. It's taken all sorts of scholars over the years, hundreds of books to try to interpret and understand it. But the essence of it is that there is a wedding that takes place on a deep esoteric level. That the wedding that we experience, the marriages that we as humans experience in the regular world, wherever our religions happen to be around the world, is a kind of metaphor for a deeper union that takes place on a subtle plane, on a spiritual plane. So there's a union of male and female powers or potencies or essences or something, a kind of a healing of a split soul, let's say. And this wedding, this esoteric wedding, if it can be experienced, then lasts forever. That wedding will last after death. It's important to realize that the Mormons believe that that no one really goes to hell. There's different levels of an afterlife. You have to be a really good Mormon to attain the ultimate level, the Joseph Smith level of the afterlife. But if you do, you and your spouse will live in this glorious paradise forever. Hell per se only exists for those who hear the word of Joseph Smith, who heed the Book of Mormon, who are aware of the Book of Mormon, but who make a conscious decision not to be Mormons, who make a conscious decision to be evil, essentially. And those people, which is like a very small percentage of the human race, according to Mormon doctrine, wind up in this kind of hell. And even then, that kind of hell isn't that bad. But, there's afterlives after that, different levels of an afterlife. It's very Swedenborgian. And you go through different heavens. And, most people will wind up in the first heaven. Some people will wind up in the second. And the highest of the high wind up in the third. And in this third heaven, you become gods. You're no longer human beings. You are gods. You are gods. Your spouse is a god. And you live as gods in your own particular individual heaven. And you don't procreate in this heaven because the number of spirits seems to be finite, according to Mormonism. They're going to be born into this world for the opportunity to become good Mormons and then attain that highest heaven. So we're just passing these spirits through to get to this ultimate place. And when all the spirits have gone through, then the world essentially comes to an end as we know it. That's one of the interpretations of the doctrines that I've seen. So this sacred marriage takes place in the temple. Joseph Smith did it with his first wife. And there's some controversy over the reasons why he did this. As I point out in the book, it seems as if he had been sort of caught with his pants down with the maid, and claimed that having sex with the maid was not adultery because he had married her in a plural marriage. And if you marry someone in a plural marriage, you can have sexual intercourse with them and it's not adultery because, well, you're married. His first wife didn't really go with that particularly. One wonders why. And in order to appease her, he created this second anointing, this second marriage ceremony in the temple where they were married, just him and her, were married for eternity. He put the seal on it and said, this marriage can never, ever, ever be broken. Not in this life, not in any life. It's done. We are married. We are the ultimate king and queen, God and goddess. We have eternal life as a married couple. That seems to have been the motivation for that particular ceremony. We know that Smith had more than 20 plural wives. Some estimates go as high as 40s. I've heard 60s. I've heard 90s. Whether he had sexual intercourse with all of them is, again, one of these controversial things that we don't really know for sure. For instance, we don't know what his relationship was physically with William Morgan's wife. We don't know about that Freemason who was killed by the other Masons, or supposedly killed. We don't know all the details. Of course, we weren't there. We weren't in the room. We don't know. But evidently, his wife was pretty much sure that he was committing physical dalliances with some of these other wives at least. So the second marriage ceremony, the sealed marriage, was important to her. I don't know if she bought it entirely because after his death, she actually did not go with Brigham Young to Salt Lake City.
Smart lady.
Oh, yeah. He stayed behind. In fact, she put her lot in with the Reformed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which was headquartered at the original temple in Ohio, in Kirtland, Ohio. So she allied herself with that. And one of Joseph Smith's sons stayed in that church as well. So you had this major schism between the two major Mormon groups. Now, I have to point something out about the sealed marriage as well in the case of Joseph Smith and his first wife. His first wife was the woman he had taken with him to find the golden plates when he finally uncovered those golden plates. There's a story about that. He had taken his brother, he was told to take his brother to the site. He was told by the angel, you have to come with your brother the next time. But his brother tragically died before September 22nd that year, when Joseph Smith was supposed to go back and look for the plates. So he had no one to take with him. And finally he found this woman. He went to look for money to divine for buried treasure at a farmer's house some distance away in another state. And he went there to look for the money. The farmer had a daughter, so it's the farmer's daughter, basically. He falls in love with the daughter, and he claims the angel, revealed to him that he was to take this woman with him to the site of the buried treasure, and then the golden plates would be revealed. And this is what he did. So this is a very ancient tradition in magic. The idea that there is a magician, a male magician, and a female magician, a soror mystica in Latin, a sister in the mysteries, a female partner. We find this in Tantra, which we've talked about a bit before, the idea that there has to be a male-female polarity in this. So this is also was there in this this most important critical moment in Joseph Smith's life, the finding of the golden plates. Whatever that event was, the finding of the golden plates, we'll call it that, took place when he was finally united with the woman who would become his first wife. So she was there at the beginning. You see, no matter what was going on, no matter what had happened, she was there. She was a witness. And so when she caught him with the maid, basically she said, you have to change your ways or it's over. This is what I'm speculating as to what might have happened. So then he married her. He created a new ceremony just for her and created it with the sealed marriage, the second anointing, and did all of this and made a special temple ceremony just for this. And now the woman who was with him when he found the golden plates was now sealed with him for eternity. So there is a continuity in this story, and it's an occult or an esoteric kind of continuity. The woman who was there at the beginning becomes sealed to him forever, even after death, in this new heaven where they both become gods. Now, I'm telling you all of this, and it's important to realize that the Mormons that you meet, especially if they're of an age, if they're in their 30s, 40s, and older, they're going to know about all of this. It's possible the very young Mormons don't.
Yeah.
Older ones will. They will know about all of this stuff. They will know the Mormon apologetics for it, how the Mormons explain it all the way, but they're also going to be exposed to a lot of criticism about Mormonism. And a lot of the facts have come out, and it's easy to find out. If you're a really concerned Mormon, you're going to come across this information, and it's going to enable you to question your beliefs to a great extent. But my point is that other Mormons that you come across in public life believe all of this, or they should believe it. The point I bring out in the book is, do you want a Mormon to be a believing Mormon, a committed Mormon, or a hypocritical Mormon, especially if he's running for political office? If you have a woman running for public office, which do you prefer? Do you prefer that the Mormon candidate really believes all this weird stuff? And it's admittedly weird, but then so is a lot of religion, let's face it. Are you ready to accept a Mormon who believes all of this? Or do you want a Mormon who says he's a Mormon but isn't really? And if he is a Mormon and isn't really a Mormon but just says he's a Mormon and says he believes but doesn't believe, is that the kind of person you want to be running for public office also? I mean, you're between a rock and a hard place on this one.
Yeah.
There's no really, there's a character question or there's the weird religion question,
Yeah.
Now, Joseph Smith wanted to be president, and had he become president, he was going to name himself king, and he was going to proclaim the United States, the Mormon promised land, the New Jerusalem. He was going to change a lot of stuff when he became president. That was his program, his agenda. I'm not saying that other candidates have that same agenda, but let's go back and revisit some of this and try to ask ourselves what, if you are, as Paul Ryan said he was as a Catholic, a believer whose belief informs his political life. If other Mormons believe that way, believe the same, what are we in for? And it's just a question. I'm just asking. I'm not predicting. I'm just asking.
Well, it's a very good question for people to consider. You know, Joseph Smith was convinced that the United States was going to be overthrown, and he would be there to pick up the pieces, which brings us to the White Horse Prophecy. He believed, I think, that the U.S. needed a God-based democracy.
Okay. That's exactly right, and Joseph Smith believed that he was the one to do it. That's why he was running for president. He wanted to be elected democratically, but once he was elected, he was going to put into motion, or he believed he could put into motion, all sorts of things that would basically overturn the way the country was set up. He would keep democracy, but his actions in Illinois leading up to his capture and assassination showed that he didn't care for the Constitution. In the first place, a newspaper that was criticizing Mormonism was shut down on Joseph Smith's orders. So there goes the First Amendment, right?
Yeah.
You know, he wanted to disarm people who were not Mormons. So there goes the Second Amendment right away.
Yeah.
He wanted to take over and make the United States a theocracy, a theocratic democracy, as he called it. So there goes the First Amendment again. I mean, the separation of church and state goes out the window. Freedom of the press goes out the window. Free speech goes out the window. You know, and only Mormons would be allowed to have guns under Joseph Smith's ruling. So, I mean, we're talking about some very drastic steps that he wanted to take. And this is the famous prophecy. He was prophesying that the United States would be destroyed. And he would be there to pick up the pieces. But this is what we've heard from so many demagogues in the past, and we hear it again today, too, of people saying the United States will be destroyed, it's inevitable, it's going to be cut down, and, you know, we're going to come in and pick up the pieces. Charles Manson said it, you know.
Yeah.
Charles Manson was trying to start the race war, and when it was over, he was going to come in and pick up the pieces. Everybody has this dream of picking up the pieces, but nobody has the dream of making the damn thing work. You know, that dream nobody has, it seems.
Yeah.
Demagogues want to wait for the destruction, and then, you know, because what did Jesus say? You know, it's easier to tear down the temple than build it up, right?
Yeah.
So this is basically, you know, a kind of chiliastic, apocalyptic kind of vision. It's this dispensationalism, you know, of Darby and all those, you know, all the people back in the 19th century who were saying that we go through these different phases and that, you know, we have to go through this millennialist phase where everything gets destroyed and a new clean world is created out of the ashes of the old one. This seems to be a kind of Western focus for so long. You know, I find it present in some Asian religions too.
Yeah.
Some, not all, but it's there. It's there in the Kala Chakra initiation, the Kala Chakra Tantra. There's talk of, you know, of the hordes coming out of Shambhala to destroy the non-believers. I mean, you know, it's there. It seems to be primarily Western, but possibly just in general a human kind of sick desire to see the whole thing just stop, just end, because it's just easier to destroy it than it is to try to fix it. And I think Joseph Smith saw it that way too. He saw how difficult it would be to convert, you know, the whole United States at that time to Mormonism. It just wasn't going to happen. There was too much bad blood. But if he had been elected president, he could have done a lot more. He could have kind of forced it down everyone's throat.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying any person running political office today has that same dream, not to that extent. But there has to be a bit of nostalgia for that time and a bit of, well, you know, let's see what I can do, you know, to push this along a little bit, you know. I'm not going to do it during my administration as a congressman, as a senator, or as a president, but I might be able to get it done, you know, little by little, make some inroads into this, because I'm a committed believer. I believe Joseph Smith was right. And, you know, what's more important to me is that I become a god after I'm dead, you know, that the United States is preserved, right? I mean, what's more important, right? You know, so, I mean, think of it. I mean, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes. I'm trying to imagine these thought processes, and I'm just speculating, so I'm not trying to scare anybody out there. But these are questions that I think should be asked. I think they should have been asked long ago. I think they should have been asked not only of Mormons, they should have been asked of Skull and Bones members.
Yeah, you betcha.
We had George W. Bush running against John Kerry, and they were both Bones men, Democrat and Republican, and neither of them would talk about it. That bothered me. And I was, I liked Kerry. But, I felt, why can't we discuss this? If you're running for the highest office in the land. Is it more important to you to keep this weird college oath to a frat, to a fraternity? Yeah. If so, there must be a really big reason behind it. Yeah. There must be very important behind it. So it's a secret society, and we've had so many political leaders and people in the military and in the intelligence community who are members of Skull and Bones who will never talk about it. And now we have Mormons, which are basically, let's face it, another secret society at a certain level of participation, in especially where the temple endowment ceremony is concerned. We still have another secret society of people who will not talk about it. So where's the democracy here exactly?
Good question.
Where is, what can we trust in these people? Could we trust a bonesman? Really? And can we trust people who belong to other secret societies who refuse to talk about these secret societies? Are they so much part of the American fabric that we've come to accept it? That if you're a Freemason, you're not going to discuss your Masonic oath. Gerald Ford was a Freemason. Harry Truman was a Freemason, And of course, George Washington and so many other presidents were Freemasons. They didn't talk about their Freemasonry. They were not open about their oaths, about their handshakes and their passwords. And why should they be? Since so many Americans were Freemasons anyway, right? Kind of an open secret. But now we have Freemasonry having set that example and having set that precedent. We now have Skull and Bones. We have the Mormons of the Temple Endowment class of those who are very much committed and involved in that, who have taken oaths not to reveal what happens. And they won't talk about it. They won't talk about Mormonism. They won't talk about their beliefs, only their actions. I love that, So remember, when you talk about your actions, you're talking about actions you've already committed, right? The actions you're going to commit, you can't talk about yet. And what motivates those actions but your beliefs? So talking about the beliefs to me is central. It's critical. It shows us what direction you're going because it shows the way you're thinking. But these beliefs will not be discussed, and that to me is unacceptable.
It's dangerous.
It's dangerous and unacceptable, absolutely. When John Kennedy was running for president, he was being vilified because he was Roman Catholic and take his orders from the Pope. There was no intimation that there was a secret society he belonged to.
Right.
You want to talk Catholicism, you go to a Catholic church. I mean, it's right there in the open. In fact, they'll shove it down your throat if you let them. There's no hatred once you've gotten involved. So I mean, that's not the issue, right? So, but these other things become secrets. Kennedy didn't walk around saying he was a member of a secret society. As a Catholic at that time, he could not join the Freemasons if he wanted to, right? Because the church prohibited you from becoming a Freemason.
Right.
I mean, it's changed since then, but I mean, the law is you can't be a Catholic and a Mason. So now we have, Freemasons, we have Skull and Bonesmen, and we have Mormons. We have secret societies replete in this country, and nobody will talk about it. Nobody will talk about what they believe. The Masons, at least, there's a lot of books on Freemasonry. You can basically look up the rituals, the first 3 degrees. In fact, all 33 in Scottish Rite are published in many places. You can find out what goes on. You won't get the passwords, and you won't get the hand grips. So, right? You'll get pretty much everything else, except the experience of becoming a Freemason. But as far as the Temple Endowment, that's secret. It's still secret to this day. Skull and Bones, absolutely secret. So we're still surrounded with secrecy, and these people want to run the country, and they are running the country. So, as Americans, I think we deserve better than that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
We have enough secrets. We have our intelligence agencies. The intelligence community now has grown astronomically since 9/11. We've got so many hundreds of thousands of people involved in the intelligence community. Pretty soon it's not going to be an intelligent community anymore. If the lowest common denominator rule, still applies. But we have secrets, up to our necks. It's too much already. Anyway, that's my personal opinion today.
Well, it certainly coincides with mine. You wrote something in your book that I really agree with, Peter, and it is Mormonism is no different from any other religion. It is as far-fetched, illogical, unreasonable, and unscientific as any mainstream religion. And
that's true.
That is a fact. It is a fact.
Which is why I don't want to single Mormonism out for its beliefs. I find their beliefs fascinating. As someone who has been writing and studying about the esoteric field, Hermetica, occultism for decades, Mormonism has always been of interest to me for that reason. Not as a religion, but as basically an occult society.
Yes.
It fascinates me for that reason. But let's face it, if we're going to attack Mormonism for their beliefs, we've got to start with, Adam and Eve in the garden, right? I mean, we have to start with, Western religion in general, and go on to all the others. I mean, where do you draw the line? So you can't really single out Mormonism, for that reason. I know that there's a lot of progressive liberal pundits who, will make fun of the magic underwear and the plural marriage, the proxy baptism. All those things are, I admit, pretty absurd. But then you've got to keep going, right? Transmuting, bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus. Okay, where do you find on this? At what point is it cannibalism or not? I mean, what are we, what are we enshrining in this practice? On and on and on. I mean, circumcision.
Yeah.
I mean, circumcision is central to Judaism and to Islam, right? Somehow it fell out of the Christianity, But there it is. I mean, and the reason given for it in the Old Testament is just pretty bizarre. There's all sorts of things, prohibitions against eating certain foods, or the Mormons don't drink coffee or any caffeinated beverages, for instance, certainly no alcohol. So you can't really, you could have a beer with George W. Bush, but you can't have a beer with Mitt Romney, or you can have the beer, but he'll have, I guess, water or milk. So, I mean, it's, where do you draw the line in all this stuff? Where do you say that one religion is more bizarre than another? I don't know. You have to sit back and ask yourself what objections you have to religion, or what attracts you to religion. I'm attracted to the idea of perfecting oneself, of learning the mysteries behind reality, what we think of as reality, studying philosophy, which questions our assumptions about what is real and what is not real, what is an object and what is a subject. All of these things can be questioned. What is form? What is substance? All of this to me is interesting because these are critical things in the way we think, especially the question of death, life after death. What is there life after death? Is there existence after death? Do we survive the process of death in some way? Does some part of us survive it? And what part is that? And what happens? All of these things are part of the human condition. We need to keep asking those questions. Religion tries to help us answer those questions. Religion tries to give us meaning. Science can't do that. It's just not comforting, as you're dying, to think of the first law of thermodynamics. It's just not. It is not going to come. And look at Isaac Newton, right? I mean, one of our most famous scientists was an alchemist and a Kabbalist. He realized there was something missing. I mean, science and religion and mysticism to him were all part of one continuous human knowledge. Aspect of human knowledge, or it was human knowledge. You couldn't separate them together. We've only separated religion from science in the last few hundred years.
Yes.
In many cultures, religion is not a separate idea. Your race, your ethnicity, your culture, your language, and your religion, it's all part of a continuum. There is no division. You don't ask people in certain cultures, what is your religion? They don't know what that means.
Yeah.
So the idea of conversion is relatively new. Converting from one religion to another. I mean, it's like changing your stripes. It's like changing your blood or your skin or something. So I think that it's essential to who we are as people to keep asking these same questions. And the meaning of what we experience, the meaning of life is important. I don't believe we can be pure atheists in the sense where we say, well, life has no meaning. Don't look for meaning. You'll just waste your time. I think it's unsatisfactory. I think that's a luxury for the wealthy. If you're wealthy and powerful, you have the luxury of being an atheist because you don't really sit there and say, oh God, why me?